Trump is president. Now, is this going to help us or hurt us as an e-commerce seller?
First thing is the election's over, so things are going to get a little bit more normal than they have been in
Yeah.
terms of traffic, in terms of ads, in terms of sales, right? We should see things normalizing a little bit, regardless of who wins. That's typically what you see after an election. Thing number two to look out for is if you are importing from China and you're utilizing that de minimis rule, whether you are drop shipping from Alibaba, AliExpress, right? You have a print-on-demand partner as an Etsy seller that's in China, or you're looking at the competition that's popping up from Temu and Shein. Those are going to struggle a little bit right now, and it's not necessarily because of what happened in the election. The minimus rule change is going to go into effect even before Donald Trump is sworn in, at least theoretically, right? And so we're going to start to see some of the competition from Temu and Shein start to have a little bit of problems. If you are an e-commerce seller that's using drop shipping from China as your business model, something you're going to want to watch very closely. If your suppliers are in the US and Canada, nothing short term is going to change for you, right? From there, what we're going to look out for early next year is, do we start seeing some of the tariffs implemented, and does it directly affect our business category? If we're selling t-shirts or whatever, there's already some tariffs on those things. But if we have a mug business, maybe ceramic doesn't have tariffs on it right now, that's something that could potentially change our costs if we are importing and not using a US or a Canadian based supplier, right? Somebody outside of China essentially is what we would be talking about. So those are the first few things we would want to look out for. I know we want to talk about some of the other things that have been proposed, and so we'll save that for when we talk about all of the regulatory fun that I know we're going to talk about here in just a minute.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's get into the Elon thing, because I want to actually hear your thoughts on that. So let's tee this thing up and let's do it. So Elon Musk made it very clear that he wanted to help Trump, which, okay, is cool. But I have a question, because I didn't really, I guess, dig in as much as Chris has. And I would love Chris's thoughts on, I'm an Elon fan as far as his cars, like, got great cars. I got one, right? But I want to know, like, he is a smart guy, like super smart guy. Is this going to help us? Is this going to hurt us? What is his, I guess, what's his plan? Like, what's his reasoning in doing this? So Chris, if you could kind of fill me in a little bit on what you know and kind of the research that you've done, I would love to hear your thoughts on Mr. Elon Musk, because he really did do his best to help Trump win. So I'm just curious.
You got to respect somebody, regardless of your thoughts on Elon Musk, you got to respect somebody who puts their money and their future livelihood where their mouth is, right? You know, if it hadn't have worked out for him, you have to wonder what happens to SpaceX, right? Like, if the candidate you're supporting doesn't win and the other person wins, do you still have the SpaceX contracts that you have? Who knows? But I think, Scott, the meme master himself, Elon Musk, was out and about in this election talking about some of the things that can be done. And I think a lot of this stems from, correct me if you know this story, because we may have talked about it. Did you and I ever talk about Elon Musk being sued by the Biden administration for violating labor law?
No, I did not.
So there is a section of the US code that says anybody who has defense information, which rocket technology is considered like really highly protected, right? You have SpaceX, they make rockets that go to outer space, right? If that falls into the hands of North Korea, that's probably not a good thing for US national security, right? So they have some very strict hiring principles. And one of the things, if you are covered under that part of US law, is that you have to hire only people who are permanent residents of the US. Okay. So they can't be just an immigrant. They can't be here on asylum. They have to have a green card or more, essentially, right? Be a US citizen or have a green card. There's another section of US law that says you can't discriminate in hiring against people who are here on a temporary status. So they're here legally, they're here on an asylum claim, and you can't not hire them, and you can't discriminate against them in the hiring process. Do you see how those two things don't exactly go together? You have a very strict requirement that says you have to hire only these people, and another law that says you can't not at least interview these people in the same way.
Yeah.
Right. And so the Biden administration said, oh, he's violating this law. And he came out and said, that doesn't make any sense. There's too much bureaucracy here, right? Mm-hmm. You don't know what you're doing on both sides of this. Turns out they ended up winning the case, at least as far as I remember, right? But that really set him off on this regulatory path of there's too much regulation going on in the US government right now. And so he came out and he's proposed what he's calling Doge, which if you don't know is an internet meme, right? It's the Shiba Inu, right? Which is the Department of Government Efficiency, saying, look, like any organization, the US government is bloated. There's a lot of things here that are good that we should keep, but there's also a lot of overlap, right? The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. There's a lot of people doing things that overlap. One of the examples that he gave was with the new rocket that SpaceX has. They needed, I think it was like 5 or 6 different departments of the US government to get together. And it took longer to get the approval to launch the rocket than it took to design, build, and have a rocket ready to launch, right? So it took the government longer to get through all of those things. Essentially what the proposal is look, we need somebody to come in and look at this as if it were a business. I don't think you've ever purchased a business. I know you've sold some businesses. But one of the things that happens even in the business world is you have a bunch of people that end up working at a company that's been around for a while and you go, what do you do? You've seen Office Space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you remember the Bobs, the 2 guys that come in and say, what exactly do you do here?
Vaguely.
Right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And so they're coming in and he's like, I don't really actually do anything. You know, I spend all of my days writing these reports only to get yelled at that I haven't written these reports well enough. And that is essentially, Elon Musk is essentially proposing that we bring the Bobs into the US government and say, what exactly is it that you do here to try to figure out if there's a way to streamline everything? What does that mean for businesses? What are we looking at? Well, one of the biggest hurdles with anything in business is the regulation. Whether you understand that directly or not, there are a lot of things that happen, right? You spend money on accountants, you spend money on LLCs, you spend money on all of these things. Is there a way to streamline that? Now, for small businesses, has regulation stopped somebody from saying, I want to open an Etsy shop? Probably not. But there are a lot of things that go into that business that are impacted. And so small businesses, starting a business is not necessarily where that's going to be. But businesses that are 2 or 3 years in, right, where maybe you're expanding into different product categories or you're selling internationally, you're doing some of those kinds of things, and medium-sized businesses, so a couple $1 million a year and more, that's where there's potentially some savings in terms of time, energy, and effort. One of the things, and I think Kamala Harris was actually the one who was talking about it. They said the average small business owner right now spends, I think it was 3 full days preparing their business tax returns, right? Like that seems insane to me. And so what Elon Musk has come out and talked about is there a way for us to streamline this, to make doing business, to make selling things to people easier while still making sure that we're not just selling things that will light on fire? So there seems to be a lot of overlap in a lot of these areas. And what he has proposed is creating a new agency, or at least some sort of, government do group or task force, depending on, how politically correct you want to be about it, to say, hey, here's the things that are redundant. Here's the things that we don't need. And then here's the things that we should probably keep. Just like he did at Twitter, right? Everybody said, you can't lay off that many people at Twitter. It's immediately going to crash. Turns out they haven't really had infrastructure issues because they had a lot of people there doing some redundant things. They were able to build some intelligence into the system. So he's hoping that whether it's him or some sort of a government task force, that they're going to be able to come in and make doing business in the US easier and essentially make lives easier for people, because you don't have to worry about stepping on, fish that nobody knows that exists and then losing your entire business.
No, I mean, that makes sense. It's almost like you're auditing the government. You know what I mean? You're like, hey, you want to audit small businesses and you want to audit businesses. How about we audit you? You know what I mean? And actually see where you're not, or where you're blowing money in certain areas, and you have people that are working for you that you don't. You're like, I'm okay with that. But my question is, and I know a lot of people's question is like, but Elon, why? Like, why get involved? You've got Tesla, right? You got the company, you got SpaceX, you've got Cyberlink, you got all these different things. You got, what's the one now with the chip that's in the head, which I think is fascinating.
Neuralink.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, super smart guy. But what's in it for you? You know what I mean? Like that's, I think the outsider is just saying like, Elon, why? You want to be more famous? You're already famous enough. You already are the richest man in the world. Like, why? Like, what's the big reason?
So honestly, and this is where we get a little potentially controversial, because it's going to sound like an endorsement of Elon. Not necessarily, right? I think he's a genius. Whether you like him or not that's totally irrelevant, right? He's a once in a lifetime talent, and he does a lot of things, and he does a lot of things well. I think it really comes down to that lawsuit that happened where they said, well, you have to do this. He goes, but I literally can't. Right. And so one of the things that he is passionate about is making humans a multiplanetary species, right? He really thinks we have to get off of Earth and colonize somewhere like Mars. How do you do that if it takes longer for a group of people to sit in a room and go, yeah, you can launch that rocket because it's almost exactly the same as the last rocket that you launched, except it's a little bit bigger? If it takes 6 months to do that and it takes 3 months to build the rocket, then we are doing something wrong in terms of the efficiency here. And it's not just a benefit to Elon and to SpaceX and to Tesla and to Neuralink to be able to streamline that process. It's a benefit to anybody in the business world. It's a benefit to innovation to not have all of those hoops to jump through. The balance that you have to then make is, okay, how do we make sure that we do this in a way that's logical,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know how the entire rest of the world sends people how much they owe in taxes instead of you having to tell the government how much you owe. And then if you get it wrong, you go to jail. Like, that seems a little weird to me, right? And so if we can rethink how we're doing these things and encourage innovation, that I think is what he's actually passionate about here, and that I think is the reason he's doing it. It's a little bit that he's kind of butthurt that the previous administration came after him, and also because he's doing all of these different things, he sees the stupidity and the redundancy, and he's saying, "Look, we need to do something about this because this is going to strangle small and medium-sized businesses. You're never going to be." I have SpaceX now. Cool. I have 100 people who do nothing but talk to the EPA, the FDA, the 100 organizations that need to get in a room to say, yes, you can press that button. You don't. How do we make sure that the next group of innovators, how the next generation's Elon Musk is able to start to create some of those cool things? That seems to be the route that they're going with this. And to me, that makes sense. Yes, there is some personal benefit to this, in terms of it would make his life easier with SpaceX. It would make his life easier with Tesla. It would make his life easier with Neuralink, right? Because there's a lot of regulation in terms of, I don't know, putting things in people's bodies, and maybe there should be some regulation there, right? But I think really what he's looking at is, how can we set this up so that the next time somebody wants to do something that's new, innovative, and different, they can do it? And the example he used recently was high-speed rail. Most of the rest of the world has high-speed rail. The US doesn't have a high-speed rail system. And the excuse that you always hear is, well, that's because Americans prefer to jump on an airplane and spend 6 hours in the air to go from LA to New York or from New York to LA. And the real answer is it comes down to the regulation, the regulatory bodies who have essentially said you can't build new railroads in the US, high speed or not, right? Because you have to worry about every single thing. There's 15 different departments involved, and maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe they do have a legitimate role. Maybe, we should make sure that we're not spilling things into water and all of those kinds of things. But also, there needs to be some common sense and a little bit of the ability to move forward. And what we have now is a little bit of a stranglehold, at least in his mind. And so the proposal is to have that Department of Government Efficiency, right? He purposely went after the most Orwellian sounding name possible. And also, in typical Elon fashion, made it an internet meme to say, hey, Doge, right? Like the Shiba Inu. And he's saying, look, this is something that needs to happen. I'd love to help with it if you'll have me. If not, let's figure out a way to get it in. And I don't know anyone that can honestly sit here and say that the government is 100% efficient. No one's business is 100% efficient. You can't tell me there's not at least 10 people somewhere in the federal government that are doing not the meeting with the Bobs, but the who's the other guy from Office Space, the guy that they fire and then just keep paying? Milton.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right? They keep he's the guy that ends up on the beach with all the money at the end. They fire him, but no one told him that they fired him, and then they eventually just stop issuing him paychecks, right? But you can't tell me there's not 10 people in a basement somewhere that haven't actually done anything, because it happens in Silicon Valley. It happens in every business. So that's essentially what he's talking about in terms of cutting regulation, trying to figure out a way to streamline this to make it easier for businesses to do business, to encourage innovation.